And it's time now for Datapoint. We are focusing on the budget of the Iebc when it's approaching the elections of 2027. Already the figure that has been made public by the Commission is that of 61.7 billion shillings, that which it should cost the Commission in running the 2027 election. Let's break it down because it's supposed to be implemented across 3 financial years. So the first one is the current one, 2025-2026, at 15.3 billion shillings. You may want to know that so far the money allocated by Parliament to the Iebc is 9.6 billion shillings to run the affairs of the Commission. But of course, they are saying they would require this much of 15.3 billion shillings to run some of those services. For the financial year 2026-2027, which will end in June 2027, which will be 2 months or less than 2 months to the general election, they will require 25.4 billion shillings to be allocated. And the actual year of election, which is 2027, 2028, and you realize that August 2027 falls into that year, they will require 21 billion shillings. And in total, that gives you the 61.7 billion shillings. Let's focus on the breakdown of some of the activities that the Commission will be undertaking. You will recall that in the 2022 general election, there were 22.1 million registered voters. Of course, the register had to go through some cleanup after the auditing by an audit firm in the country. There are additional voters that are expected by the Commission are up to 5.7 million registered voters. These are people that may have turned 18 since the 2022 general election, and also some Kenyans who may not have been registered by that time. So the projections for 2027 is a raw figure of 27.8 million voters. So that comes with its implication because it requires that you have extra polling stations. You recall that the law requires that a polling station cannot have more than 700 registered voters for the sake of management of the election day and efficiency. In 2022, the country had 46,229 voting stations or polling stations. In 2027, the Iebc estimates that there should be some 55,393 polling stations. So that's an increment of slightly over 9,000, much of it attributed to the increasing number of registered voters that are expected to be registered before the next election. Let's focus on what else the numbers are saying. The key cost points for the Iebc leading to the 61.7 billion shillings. Of course, you know the vote registration, which has not been happening since June 2022, actually earlier than that in 2022. So this is a cost element because the Commission says that come August, they will gazette when they will resume the continuous vote registration. There will be the question of ballot papers. Remember, there are 6 elections across the country. And of course, this also is determined by the number of candidates per seat. Then election operations have to be financed. There's so much logistics that have to be run. And of course, the election technology, which is a requirement in law that election must be a key component of management, those elections, that is technology. But also the KIMS kits, these are the gadgets that will be used to identify voters on the day of voting. Already they have said, the Iebc has said that it will cost some 7 billion shillings to buy new kits. Of course, there are some that can be reused, especially the 14,000 that were procured in the year 2022. Now, you may want to know, one of the key targets of the Iebc is to conduct by-elections. In total, there are 23 by-elections, 6 National Assembly, 1 for Senate, and 16 for MCAs. I want us to take a look at some of the parliamentary by-elections that will be undertaken. Baringo County is the county election because they have to elect a new senator after the senator of that county died earlier this year. Then the other constituencies who have lost their members of Parliament, there's Malava, there's Kasipul, there's Banissa, which lost their members of Parliament. Banissa was first back in March 2023, meaning that since March 2023, which is more than 2 years, that constituency has not had a representative in the National Assembly. The other constituencies like Ugunja, this lost their member of Parliament, who is Opiyo Wandayi, who became a cabinet secretary in August 2024. So for a year, they have not had a member of Parliament. A constituency like Mbeere North, this is a constituency where the current public service cabinet secretary Geoffrey Ruku came from, so therefore they have not had a member of Parliament for a few years. Magarini constituency is another one that has had no member of Parliament for more than a year after the then member of Parliament's election was declared null and void by the Supreme Court. So what more do we know? The numbers to reflect on are on the cost of by-elections, and using the figures of the year 2023, because that time when respective parliamentarians were elected or appointed into cabinet, there was by-elections conducted. In Kandara constituency, for instance, with a registered voters population of 105,000, there were 49.5 million shillings was used to run that election. In Garissa town, which has almost half of that, this is 53,000 registered voters, 44.4 million shillings is what was used to run that by-election. Elgeyo Marakwet County, a senatorial election to replace Kipchumba Murkomen, 213,000 registered voters. The cost was 143 million shillings. For Bungoma, again, a senatorial by-election with 646,000 registered voters to replace Speaker Moses Wetangula. The cost was 233 million shillings. So you can see the effect of the registered voters on the cost, but also we can draw some conclusions. The total for those elections was 471 million shillings. Let's focus on what more. So you can see from those estimates, a constituency would cost between 40 million shillings and 50 million shillings to run a by-election. That was in 2023. Things may have gotten higher because of inflation questions. For a county election, you're talking about between 140 million and 233 million, of course, using the sample that we have. So you can start to imagine what will happen in those constituencies. Let's just take a look at the registered voters. In Baringo County, this has registered voters of 281,000 voters. So, of course, the cost implication will depend on the factors, including the number of polling stations and the number of officers that will be required to run it. Ugunja constituency, 60,000 registered voters. They may require more than 40 million shillings based on the figures of Garissa town with 53,000 voters. Mbera North, again, 55,000 registered voters, close to what Garissa town population is in voters. Banisa constituency, 32,703. The other question would be how diverse or what is the population density for that particular constituency that may affect the number of polling stations. Magarini constituency, 80,000 registered voters. Kasipul, 67,000 registered voters. And Malava constituency, 94,000 registered voters. So that's just for the constituencies and Senate. But of course, remember there are 16 member of county assembly by-elections that are to be conducted. So what will happen? Because like I told you, the Iebc is struggling with the deficiency of more than or close to 7 billion shillings in running the affairs the Commission. So what will happen is that in the next slide, we will see possibly the utilization of Article 223 of the Constitution that allows the government to utilize resources on matters that had not been budgeted for. And for that, eventually, you might see a supplementary budget coming in to effect what Article 223 will have done. So either of the two may happen. If Article 223 happens, a supplementary budget must come later to regularize that expenditure. And that's what we'll be looking up to as Iebc begins work officially. That's Datapoint for this week. Coming up,